Hello and welcome to Policy Talk with Tarun Nangia. And today we're going to discuss the very intriguing and something that topic that interests all of us, which is artificial intelligence and society. And I have a guest with me who understands this subject very well. I want to welcome Aditya Gemawat. He is machine learning engineer at Microsoft in the USA, but what he speaks today with us will be in his capacity as somebody who observes the world of technology very closely and studies it. Welcome, Aditya, and looking forward to a very interesting half an hour conversation.
Yeah, thanks a lot for having me, Tarun. It's great to be here and excited to chat with you on this.
Recently, I happened to chance upon your article on the field of artificial intelligence, where in the inception of the article, you mentioned how AI is changing family dynamics in the sense how families work, how AI is used within the house for work. What is that about? Could you reflect on that for a few minutes?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question, Tarun, because initially when ChatGPT got released, this was probably the first time that I personally saw AI models being used for typical sort of household applications where these kinds of models really became sort of like household brands in terms of their usage and discussions about them. This was the first time when my mom, for example, took a real interest in what I was working by telling me that her friends were using ChatGPT to generate cooking recipes, and she felt that she was missing out. This was also the first time when my dad stopped commenting on our family WhatsApp group, asking us to draft messages for him because he would just use ChatGPT to auto-generate WhatsApp messages for him. So this was a really interesting sort of moment in time where initially I personally shunned off ChatGPT as, okay, just another interesting tool. My parents would probably use it for some time and then kind of forget about it. Or maybe the responses would feel robotic or unreal after a point and people might start using it, or it might just be a fad. But it turned out to be so much more than that, where it kind of really redefined not only how we interact with AI models, but also how we kind of engage in our kind of daily activities, both personally and to some extent professionally as well. And that was really the point about how it's gradually transforming discussions, activities, and even awareness in local households about these AI models and how they can actually affect their life.
Point well taken. In your article, you mentioned that artificial intelligence is not an autopilot, but rather a co-pilot with a human being that uses it. Could you reflect on how that is going to happen now and also in future?
Yeah, absolutely. So that was a point that I pretty much stole from Microsoft and like a couple large organizations who had kind of made this claim. And I found this claim to be like really refreshing and a pretty good description of classifying these kinds of era and waves of these new AI model capabilities as they come in. What this typically means is, Tarun, traditionally, the way that AI models have been served to users is in a mode of autopilot. For example, if someone is scrolling through Facebook, right? Facebook or these kinds of social media platforms might have, say, a model under the hood, which would recommend certain kinds of content to them. So in a way, it's not the user explicitly invoking the model, there are models working under the hood to like serve the most relevant content and provide these kinds of services and things like that. This
Uh,
recent, yeah, go ahead.
yes, please go on. Please go on.
Yeah, yeah. The recent wave of Gen AI has kind of brought in a philosophical shift from having models work on the autopilot to co-pilot, where these kinds of models like ChatGPT can actually be consciously invoked by the users. Users would actually be aware that they're using these AI models and actually invoking them. And users can actually put in relevant tailored context towards what kind of service they would like the model to perform for them.
One thing that I would like to know from you is about, there are a lot of doomsday predictions about the job losses. In your article, you said McKinsey says 80 crore job losses due to artificial intelligence. Uh, Difficult to understand. I mean, will these jobs be replaced by some other jobs or not like that? 80 crores jobs will be lost and maybe 20 will be replaced. What is the kind of future we are looking at with the increasing use of AI?
Yeah, it's been pretty interesting for me personally to kind of look at these reports from these large consulting organizations. And one unified message that I got to learn about through all of these reports is there is going to be a massive job disruption, to like a very non-trivial degree, where a lot of jobs are not only going to be transformed, but we're kind of seeing work being redefined in terms of how humans can actually bring value to whatever capacity that they're working in. As these models evolve more and as we get to know about capabilities that we could outsource to automation or outsource to technology, our notions of what humans are actually good at and how they can contribute is actually being redefined here. And to be a little bit more specific here on some of the metrics and things like that, on one side, sure, it might sound like a doomsday prediction where there are so many jobs that are prone to disruption. People are still learning about these AI models, but also likely not as fast as all the latest developments that might have been happening. However, at the same time, I have also seen reports like, I believe the 2024 Work Trend Index that was jointly released by Microsoft and LinkedIn, where I believe they had claimed, from my memory, that 92% of knowledge workers in India, for example, are already using AI tools and large language models like ChatGPT in some capacity to outsource, say, like smaller parts of their work. That could be anything from like sending emails, for example, or drafting certain kinds of messages, or even trying to use AI-powered web search and things like that. And this metric of 92% of knowledge workers in India using AI at some level is much higher than the global average of 75%, as claimed by that report. So even though there have been like these kinds of like, whether you call them doomsday predictions, whether you call them some kind of scare that has naturally happened in society, which by the way has kind of happened like throughout human history as new technologies get introduced, whether it be around transportation, whether it be the invention of calculators, automating mathematical computations, right? Things like that in computers and so on and so forth. There are still there's a great promise in the sense of people actually starting to adopt these tools as we're already seeing by some of these metrics. And it's still been pretty nice to see that we as a race are still kind of evolving and at least trying to make an attempt to constantly be on our toes, try to learn the next best thing, and try to still embrace the changes that are coming in front of us and not just shun them. Because we're probably at a point in human history where the speed of changes that are happening in front of us is probably the fastest they have ever been in human history, from what I can personally understand. And so it's still been pretty good and refreshing to not only see the pace of developments, but to also kind of see some optimism and hope in terms of people still starting to onboard to these new toolings and frameworks, and at least trying to see how they can create impact in a more magnified way now.
Point well taken. One thing that a lot of people are talking about in India also is the impact on the healthcare sector, how auto diagnostics will be used to diagnose a disease much before it turns fatal, or many other uses of healthcare. Even you have highlighted it in your article. Could you reflect on the great change that is going to come to the field of healthcare using artificial intelligence?
Mhm. Yeah, so there's a Pandora's box of applications that can be unlocked even in fields like healthcare. So, from my rudimentary understanding about the healthcare industry, industries like healthcare or even legal are typically industries that feel to us working in the tech space as more traditional in terms of there might be some hesitation to necessarily adopt the very latest technologies, partially for the right reasons as well, because these kinds of mission critical industries like healthcare, law enforcement, etc., might also be mission critical to the people that they're serving and can still require high levels of human oversight and intervention. At the same time, what we have already seen from researchers and even from organizations slowly starting to onboard AI into their day-to-day workflow, there's a great deal of automation that can be performed at various steps of the process when it comes to actually treating patients, when it comes to doctors trying to keep tabs on a person's history, when it comes to providing more personalized healthcare facilities at a fraction of the cost by partially automating some of those services, say through a chatbot and things like that, creating different kinds of automations this way. And there has also been research in the area of deep learning where certain kinds of models are even able to match, if not improve upon human level accuracies in terms of detecting certain diseases. For example, detecting tumors or pneumonia, etc., in like an X-ray scan of lungs, for example. So there are these kinds of applications which have been really powerful and to some extent have even kind of improved over typical human benchmarks. Now, this definitely does not mean that this is going to at all replace the work of doctors because it's still very mission critical. It can affect the lives of patients. There's high human intervention and there's regulation as well. But what this can do and what this is already doing is trying to make a doctor's life a lot easier in terms of basically uh, basically serving as an aid to make initial decisions or make recommendations to domain experts like doctors so that they can make the final call. So in a way, the decisions that are now being made in mission critical areas like healthcare can be a lot more data driven and informed by this foundational knowledge that is encoded by these AI models. And this has been already showcased, at least at an academic level, and to some extent on an industrial level as well, across multiple modalities of data, like images with the X-ray scans, like text, for example, with notes about the patient's health and their medical history, even across audio in terms of doctor-patient interactions over, say, like even voice conferencing apps and things like that. So there's a lot of potential here already. And I don't just want to limit to talking about these applications and trying to paint a bright picture of how the healthcare industry can benefit and how those domain experts should adopt technology and things like that. Because I understand that there can be a learning curve with actually operationalizing this. There are tangible constraints like business expenses and things like that as well. So I also want to point to a couple of reports that I got to cite in my article as well, where some of these large consulting organizations even claimed that the infusion of AI in industries like healthcare could even save up to like $150 billion per year just in the US, for example. And we're just talking about one country here, and we probably haven't even touched upon, say, like countries like India, where serving some of these scale can yield like exponentially larger benefits in terms of the cost savings and in terms of really enhancing the delivery mechanisms of these mission critical solutions.
Point well taken. When you spoke about India, one thing I also remembered from your article was the huge loss of business process outsourcing kind of jobs. In India, you saw between 2000 and 2015, 16, the huge mushrooming of BPOs in all urban centers. And a lot of youngsters got jobs. Do you think those jobs will, I mean, they have come down in a huge way in the past few years. Do you think they will eventually be very minimal now because given the advance of AI and allied technologies?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. It is hard for me to very specifically pinpoint like how much will it decrease or to what extent. But I would probably just go out on a limb here and say that the level of AI development that I have also personally seen and understood in India is already well in parity compared to other major global players in tech and other major countries. And so with that, I do see a lot of really great professional opportunities that are already emerging in India. I personally have got to learn, say, even through my work or even say being in the tech industry, that there are very similar opportunities at a parity of the kinds of skill sets that are needed and the kinds of developments that are happening in India as well as the US. So these differences in like professional opportunities are decreasing quite a bit, fortunately. I have also personally seen that there are these really interesting projects that kind of arose out of India that were kind of built in India across language translation capabilities, voice recognition capabilities, and some of these really interesting AI-powered applications, which have scaled really well across the diverse surface of India in terms of the demographic sort of spread of India, in terms of linguistic diversity and things. And so I still kind of see that a lot of jobs are kind of going to still emerge in India. And it's also possible that those jobs can be quite unique to the unique challenges that that a diverse country as India is also kind of getting to encounter and explore about. Because we are talking about essentially the most populated country in the world. We are talking about a country that has hundreds of languages, a couple thousands of dialects, perhaps. We are talking about a country that has one of the most diverse geographies of any other country in the planet. And so the kinds of challenges that a country as diverse as India might be facing are quite unique and interesting in their own ways. And solutions for these kinds of problems deeply entrenched in the context of the fabric of India, pretty much, is something that's perhaps the best uniquely understood by the people living there. And so that can naturally kind of create opportunities that likely the world may not have ever seen before. And this can have really interesting sort of applications where these kinds of jobs or these kinds of roles can gradually even position India as a leader in its own way in terms of the scalability aspect of technology and in terms of how they're able to scale technology and kind of make it apply to like diverse sections of society over a tremendous market volume, which is something that India can even export to the rest of the world. So long story short, to kind of answer your question, Tarun, in terms of whether the jobs are going to decrease or not, I feel like there is going to be job disruption in India as with any part of the world. But the kinds of unique challenges that India is getting to face and has the opportunity to solve can already position itself as a leader in terms of solving those kinds of diverse problems and even exporting those kinds of solutions to the rest of the world.
Uh, Thank you. Point noted. But I'll take this to another level of discussion. There has been AI legislation in California, as your article suggests. Now in India also, for example, let me take an example of driverless cars. Tesla is a big name in USA. India, not much, so not many cars have been sold. I mean, it's not been officially introduced in India. So unless somebody imports, there won't be any of these cars. So till it is introduced, do you think these all will also have political ramifications given that in countries like India, huge population of drivers, maybe in crores. Uh, will technology and AI, in a sense, come in confrontation with the labor class, people who are working 8, 10, 12 hours a day in countries like India and earning a living? Or do you think that technology will prevail and eventually automated cars are the future? Uh, where are we headed? I mean, from what you understand, that from where you are currently in US.
Yeah, that's a very difficult question to answer. I'm not gonna lie. But I will kind of take a shot here. So I will kind of say that, of course, like things are evolving at such a rapid pace, right? That it is naturally hard for lawmakers to really keep track of all these developments and how they can best regulate it. Fortunately, we have seen regulation, say, in the EU, in the US through an executive order. There have been some regulation in California as well that is trying to address some of these challenges and trying to still regulate AI by making sure that safety guardrails also come into place. I believe India is also working. I believe I read in the newspaper some time back that India is also working on an AI legislation of its own. And in fact, I believe one of the government websites already has some AI advisory in terms of at least acknowledging some of these AI challenges as a start in terms of dealing with personally identifiable information, biometric data, and even acknowledging issues like hallucinations in large language models, like the ability, like outputting a response which is just incorrect, acknowledging the challenges with deepfakes and things like that, right? In terms of how much friction might get created between politicians and technology, right? Friction is bound to happen. We're talking about, say, people from two very different kinds of groups with their own sort of existing notions about things. And this kind of challenge, at least at a legal level, would definitely take time to solve. I personally believe that friction is not a bad thing because if people are working together to still create regulations and still trying to consult with people, I believe this is a kind of healthy dialogue that any democracy should have, for example. And so it is natural to say initially push back on challenges like, hey, we won't allow driverless cars because there is a lot of working population that actually depends on this as an employment. And they're not incorrect technically, because technically there is a large population there that does more of the traditional work of things like driving, right?
So, do
It
you think in countries with large populations like India, this is going to be a much bigger problem than with countries where there are less people? European countries, Canada, where there are people, number of people are much. For them, it is a boon. I mean, you don't have to hire labor. But I think it's the reverse in countries like maybe India and other countries which are densely populated.
It is possible. It could kind of go both ways in the sense that with the sheer with the sheer increase in like infrastructure projects in India and the sheer pace of developments that have been happening in terms of roadways, transportation, and things like that, as as more data gets collected about like the latest infrastructure in India, data across like roads and traffic signals and rules in India, for example, that data can also be used to train these models. And so what can happen as a result is that these models can gradually get better at even detecting the unique challenges that might be faced by Indian roads. And so it's kind of like a double-edged thing where if a solution can even work in like a major city in India, the amount of business value that that can create can be really immense, not just in terms of potentially reducing road accidents, but also in terms of really streamlining traffic workflows and things like that. So I believe that, like, in a way, this change kind of would really end up being iterative. Yes, it could be a larger challenge for countries like India naturally because of a huge population depending on this livelihood. But by kind of gradually engaging in reskilling programs for those people or gradually testing some these cars at a smaller level before pushing them out, that is probably one of the most natural ways to go about it. In fact, this is already happening in the US right now. It's not that driverless cars are running all across the country or anything. They're only being tested in a few cities where regulations allow them to do that. So that is mostly happening either in San Francisco, perhaps in the Bay Area, in areas like Phoenix, Arizona, which have like really huge like interstate highways, and the regulations allow for testing of driverless vehicles. I believe in areas like San Francisco, there are still companies like Waymo, for example, that might offer some of these like driverless taxi services. And they are able to, in fact, like operate in like a smaller scale, transporting people from like one place to another pretty much, right? So this is happening, but this is still happening at a very small scale. And it is not just because of the limitations of regulation. It is to also collect data and results in order to go back to the government and convince them to actually increase the scope of where these kinds of vehicles can be tested. So I do believe it will take a substantial amount of time. So it's not that drivers are going to be out of jobs tomorrow. It's going to be a very gradual process of not just refining the technology, but also convincing the government with empirical data and results on the kind of value that this can actually offer, to then gradually onboard new technologies like driverless cars into specific areas. Fortunately, we have already seen that electric vehicles, for example, in India, seem to be very widely adopted now, especially in major cities like New Delhi, which not only have electric vehicles for like taxi services or public vehicles, but also now boast a much more extensive network of electric chargers, like or charging stations for these vehicles, right? So all of this is like great development and really a step in the right direction. And I believe this is kind of like how it'll organically also go.
Thank you for reflecting on the artificial intelligence and society. In our next talk with you, we would like to discuss the whole world of wearables, the immense amounts of data being collected via wearables and its impact on healthcare. Because now almost there is a mushrooming of wearable products all across the world, in terms of rings or watches, mobile phones, trackers. How will that impact society? Because of course, all that data collected would be used for something, would be used for healthcare, would be used for medicine. Many things going to happen. I mean, that is one area that now interests, and the cost of wearables have come down by a significant amount. So a larger number of population, say, in countries like India can afford it. That we will focus on our next talk, but I really appreciate you for finding time and discussing on artificial intelligence and society. Look forward to our next talk. Thank you.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.